Don't fault you if it's not on your calendar, but the Republican National Convention starts in 4 days, and Donald Trump has yet to announce his running mate. He sent the last guy to be hung at the insurrection. But what has been a years-long campaign featuring some of the most power-craven Trump sycophants, especially in a post-January 6th era, has now whittled down to 3 top contenders who have kissed the ring often enough and enthusiastically enough to be on the list, the short list for Trump's VP pick. They include Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, and Florida Senator Marco Rubio, once famously nicknamed Little Marco. But before the former Apprentice host makes his next hire, here's what some of those candidates have said about Donald Trump, the disgraced convicted ex-president they now desperate want to serve as his number 2.
We are not going to turn over the conservative movement to a con artist who is telling people one thing but has spent 40 years sticking it to working Americans and now claims to be their champion.
Would you ever do business with Donald Trump?
I don't think so.
Why?
I just think that it's important that you're judged by the company you keep, and You
just wouldn't do business with him?
No, I wouldn't.
Well, you know, Senator, this is an evolution, and I know you've been asked about this before, about past comments that you've made about Donald Trump. You've said, I'm a never Trump guy, never liked him, terrible candidate, idiot if you voted for him, might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole, cultural heroine, noxious and reprehensible.
I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president.
And you know what they say about men with small hands? You can't trust them. You can't trust them.
We're back with NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. So is it the guy who called him America's Hitler, the guy who got in a fight with him on stage about the size of his hands, or the guy who said you're judged by the character of the company you keep?
Right. I think, frankly, the anticipation was that he was going to have a VP candidate, a running mate, somebody who would be ultimately loyal to him. The reason that he threw Mike Pence off the cliff was because ultimately he was loyal for only 4.5 years, not loyal in Donald Trump's mind on January 6th. And when you look at these 3 finalists, look, who was on the campaign trail with Marco Rubio when he was making some of these comments in that 2016 campaign when he was challenging him, he directly made reference that Donald Trump had, quote, third world strongman rhetoric. The idea that put your faith in me and I'll make things better. He's going to single-handedly do this or that. He went on to say if he hadn't inherited $200 million, you know where Donald Trump would be right now? Selling watches in Manhattan. It's really a stark contrast, but even more so, the North Dakota governor, Doug Burgum, those comments to our Chuck Todd came just 1 year ago. And it's notable, just in a radio conversation with a right-wing outlet yesterday, Donald Trump, when he was mentioning Doug Burgum, he said that he wasn't so sure about him because he signed a 6-week abortion ban in the state of North Dakota, which may have gone too far, which again brings into the idea that Donald Trump is looking politically at who could be advantageous for him here. Of course, if Marco Rubio were to be the selection, one of them would have to change residencies. And if Marco Rubio were to do that, of course, he would have to step aside as his position as U.S. Senator because he represents Florida. So there's a lot on the line here, potentially. But, of course, you're looking at potentially that decision coming in Milwaukee at the convention, Nicole.
Vaughn, is there any chance it's none of these 3, or is the reporting pretty solid that it's one of these 3?
Ultimately, I keep getting told that the decision will come from Donald Trump. And I think, frankly, there were some people that have whispered to me, Ben Carson, somebody who had no interest in running for president ever again, somebody who has been loyal to a T to him through not only his time in the administration, but in the 4 years since. But also look at the likes of Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, somebody who was one of the impeachment managers to defend him. And over the course of the last 5 years has been a stalwart defender of his, somebody who has been on the national airwaves trying to strike that strong defense. And most of her public critiques of him were not, public. They were made in private and have been written about. But so I think there is definitely an open question mark. 2 weeks ago, he said that he had made up his mind. But just this week, he is now suggesting that he is still trying to make his decision. And I think one other note on this here, Nicole, is when you're looking at who that running mate would be, there's serious questions. Who would potentially certify election results and go along with anything come 2029? And Marco Rubio did certify the 2020 election. So I think that there is a lot that we not only are looking at potentially here for this November, but also what that individual, the role they would serve during the administration.
Why hasn't he done it yet? What's moved the timing?
I think it's a good question. He did suggest this week that he was waiting to see whether Joe Biden would potentially drop off the ticket, that could change his decision-making process. Of course, Tim Scott was a perceived front runner early on when he joined him up on stage at a campaign rally in New Hampshire and then went and was there with him for each of the months that followed. But he's really dropped in this. But potentially Tim Scott, if Kamala Harris were to move to the top of the ticket, would, of course, increase in his consideration. But of course, J.D. Vance, our colleague Henry Gomez is now reporting that Don Jr. is going to be giving the final speech ahead of the VP selection at the convention. He and J.D. Vance have struck up a close relationship over the last 2 years. They share a team of advisors, and potentially that could be indication of which direction he is going. J.D. Vance has really been an outspoken individual who we could get much more into this conversation on the idea of firing the civil workforce. He has been a big proponent of increasing the executive powers to ensure that individuals in the departments and agencies at the civil workforce level are ready to carry out the orders of the president and the executives in the administration. And so I think J.D. Vance is very much the one who has most closely come to speaking the ideas of Project 2025 and the Trump world. And so I think that if he is ultimately their pick, I think that Donald Trump sees somebody who is willing to carry out what he seeks to do inside of his administration in a second term.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.